The sound of the garage door opening was my 7 o'clock alarm. I didn't need to look at the clock on the microwave. I knew it was exactly 7 p.m., which meant Mark was home. The predictable rhythm of our life was a comfort, usually. I was at the sink, my hand submerged in soapy water, scrubbing a pot that had held tonight's spaghetti. Our daughter, Chloe, was in the living room. The familiar soundtrack of a cartoon providing a cheerful backdrop to our evening. Mark came in through the mudroom, the scent of crisp autumn air and faint office coffee clinging to his jacket. He dropped his briefcase by the door with a tired thud and came up behind me, planting a soft kiss on my cheek. "Hey, Sarah," he murmured. "Smells good in here." "Left you a plate in the oven," I said, nodding towards the appliance. "How was the day?" "Long, but good. We finally closed the Henderson account." He leaned against the counter, loosening his tie. He looked exhausted, but there was a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Mark was a hard worker, a dedicated financial analyst, and his pride in a job well done was one of the first things I'd loved about him. "That's great, honey." "I knew you could do it." I smiled, genuinely happy for him. This account had been a source of late nights and weekend work for weeks. Just then, his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it, and his relaxed posture instantly stiffened. "It's Mr. Davies," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Mr. Davies." The name was spoken in our house with a tone of reverence and a touch of fear. He wasn't just Mark's boss. He was the managing partner of the entire firm. A man who held the keys to our financial future, our dreams of a bigger house, a safer college fund for Chloe. Mark's promotions, his bonuses, they all flowed from the pen of Mr. David Davies. "Hello? Mr. Davies?" Mark answered, his voice suddenly polished and professional. "Yes, sir." "No, that's fine." "I understand." "Sure, right now?" "Okay, I'll be waiting." He hung up and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure anxiety. "He's in the neighborhood. Wants to drop off some files for me to look over tonight. He said he'd only be a minute." My eyes widened. "He's coming here now?" A wave of domestic panic washed over me. The house was clean, but was it boss clean? There were Lego castles on the living room floor and a stack of my library books on the coffee table. "Yeah, he's 5 minutes away." Mark was already in motion, snatching Chloe's stray crayons from the kitchen table and straightening the chairs. "Can you just, you know, make sure everything's presentable?" I dragged my hands quickly. "I'm on it." 3 minutes later, the doorbell chimed, a sound that suddenly felt far too formal for our home. Mark took a deep breath, put on a calm smile, and opened the door, and there he was. David Davies. He was taller than I'd imagined, with sharp, intelligent features and silvering hair that spoke of authority rather than age. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored overcoat, and he carried a simple leather folio. He didn't look like a man who had just left an office. He looked like a man who was in office, condensed into human form. "Mark," he said, his voice a calm, resonant baritone. "Sorry to intrude on your family time." "Not at all, sir." "Please, come in." Mr. Davies stepped over the threshold, and it felt like the air pressure in our home changed. He seemed to take in the entire scene with a single, sweeping glance, the cozy, slightly cluttered kitchen, the sound of the cartoon from the living room, me standing awkwardly by the sink. "This is my wife, Sarah," Mark said. Gesturing towards me, Mr. Davies turned his gaze on me, and for a moment I felt utterly transparent. His eyes were a piercing shade of blue, and they held a depth of perception that was unnerving. He offered a small, polite smile. "Sarah, a pleasure. Mark speaks very highly of you." He extended a hand. His grip was firm, dry, and brief. "It's nice to finally meet you." "Mr. Davies," I managed, my voice sounding a little too bright. "Please, call me David." He said it, but the name felt unnatural in this context. He was a Mr. Davies. He was power and a paycheck. He wasn't a David who stood in my kitchen. Just then, Chloe, curious about the new voice, peeked around the corner. She had her favorite stuffed rabbit, a well-loved, floppy-eared thing named Binky, clutched in her hand. Mark looked momentarily flustered, but Mr. Davies David was the one who reacted. His whole demeanor shifted. The corporate sharpness softened at the edges. He didn't crouch down or put on a silly voice, which I found myself respecting. He simply looked at her and gave a small, genuine nod. "And who is this?" He asked. "This is our daughter, Chloe," I said. "Hello, Chloe," he said. His voice was still serious, but it was no longer intimidating. It was respectful, as if he were addressing a fellow adult. Chloe, usually shy, surprised us all. She held up Binky. "This is Binky. He's sad because he lost his carrot." David looked at the ragged rabbit, then back at Chloe, his expression utterly grave. "A serious predicament? Unsure a suitable replacement can be found. Perhaps a blue one?" Chloe's eyes went wide, as if he had just suggested the most revolutionary idea in the history of carrot procurement. She nodded, mesmerized. He then turned his attention back to Mark, handing him the folio. "The projections are in the front. I need your initial thoughts by 9 a.m. The rest is background." "Of course, sir." "I'll get right on it," Mark said, taking the folio like it was a holy text. David's eyes flickered back to me. "Thank you for your hospitality, and for sharing your home with me for a moment." His gaze lingered for a second longer than was strictly necessary, and in that second, it wasn't the boss looking at the employee's wife. It was a man looking at a woman, and he seemed to see the faded university sweatshirt I was wearing, the messy bun, the tiredness around my eyes from a long day of parenting and chores. He saw the me beneath the role of Mark's wife, and then he was gone. "Good night," he said, and he turned and walked out, the door closing with a soft, final click. The three of us stood in the sudden silence for a moment, the only sound the cheerful, oblivious cartoon from the other room. The entire interaction had taken less than 2 minutes. He'd said it'd only be a minute, and he was a man of his word. Mark let out a long, slow breath. "Wow, okay, I need to get to work on this." He was already heading towards his small home office, the folio tucked under his arm, his mind already miles away in a world of numbers and strategies. I stayed in the kitchen, my hand resting on the cool laminate of the countertop. The soapy water in the sink had grown cold. The encounter was over, but a strange, restless energy had been left in its wake. For the next several days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It was like a mental splinter, a tiny, persistent irritation I couldn't dig out. It wasn't that he'd been rude. Quite the opposite. He'd been perfectly, impeccably polite. It was the specificity of his politeness. The way he had looked at Chloe, not as a cute accessory, but as a person. The way he had looked at me. I replayed that final glance over and over. It wasn't flirtatious. It was observant. It was as if in those 2 minutes he had compiled a detailed dossier, not just on our home, but on our life. He saw the comfortable, worn-in couch. He saw the family photos on the wall, charting our history from a young, hopeful couple to tired but happy parents. He saw the small pile of bills on the counter by the fruit bowl. He saw the life we had built together, with all its mundane, beautiful, and sometimes stressful details, and I started thinking about Mark, my sweet, hardworking, predictable Mark. He lived in a world of clear directives and quantifiable results. He worked to provide for us, to hit his targets, to earn the approval of the man who had just stood in our kitchen. His world was one of black and white spreadsheets, but David Davies? His world was all about reading the gray areas. It was about assessing risk, understanding human capital, perceiving the unspoken dynamics in a room. His success wasn't just about crunching numbers. It was about crunching people. He had to understand what made them tick, what their weaknesses were, what they truly wanted. He had looked at our little domestic tableau and, I was sure, understood it completely. He saw Mark's desire to please, my quiet management of the home front, the delicate ecosystem of our family dot the thought was unsettling. Had he seen the tiny fissures? The way Mark and I sometimes talk past each other after a long day? The slight resentment I sometimes fought down when he was late for dinner again? Did he see the woman I was before I was Mom and Sarah? Mark's wife, the woman who used to read philosophy and dream of writing a novel? I found myself looking at my own life through this new imagined lens. Was our life enough? Was it impressive? Was it pitiable? The question was absurd, and I knew it. Why should I care what my husband's boss thought of our throw pillows or our dinner menu? But I did. I tried to bring it up with Mark a few days later. That was strange, huh? His boss just showing up like that. Mark, scrolling through his phone, just shrugged. Yeah, a little. But that's Davies. He's always on. It's why he's where he is. He said it with a kind of awe. To Mark, David Davies was a force of nature, a goal to be aspired to. He didn't feel the strange, psychic fingerprint the man had left behind, but I did. That minute had stretched into days inside my head. It had forced me to see the narrative of my own life from the outside, as if I were a character in a story someone else was reading. It made me feel both fiercely protective of our simple, messy, loving life and strangely restless within it.